Hello and welcome, I'm Adam Jasser. On the record, the pullout of American troops from a military base in Poland serving Ukraine's war effort is just a long-planned reassignment. Off the record, officials admit that it confirms what Donald Trump has warned Europe about: less US engagement in defending the continent from belligerent Russia. What should we make of this move, and is Europe doing enough to address its own defenses? Marek Świerczyński, a leading Polish defense analyst with Polityka Insight, will tell us in just a minute. But first, a short report.
The United States is downsizing its troop presence at the Polish military airfield in Jasionka, eastern Poland, the main logistics hub for delivering Western weapons to Ukraine over the past 3 years. The shift is part of a broader reassessment of America's military footprint in the region. According to NBC News, the Pentagon is considering withdrawing up to 10,000 troops from Eastern Europe altogether.
This is a symbolic change. I wouldn't want to see such symbols, but that's how politics sometimes plays out.
With America now saying that Europe needs to take care of its own security, the European Union is stepping up. The European Commission has proposed a sweeping new plan called Rearm Europe, a package that could mobilise up to 800 billion euros in defence spending. The money would come from EU-backed loans, national contributions and targeted fiscal flexibility. The goal is to strengthen Europe's defence capabilities, speed up joint procurement and boost industrial production, particularly in missile defence, drones and artillery systems. There's also movement outside Brussels. A coalition of the willing, a growing group of European governments ready to act faster and spend more, is taking shape. This week, Warsaw will host an informal meeting of EU finance ministers. The agenda? Defence and security spending. Poland is leading that charge. With defence spending set to hit almost 5% of GDP this year, it's by far NATO's most ambitious contributor in relative terms.
Particularly in Poland, is a very profound conviction that we have to spend more on defense. So I can even imagine that the Polish people could accept some relocation of resources if it's necessary. And I think the Europeans, the other countries, also should recognize the new reality.
But the money doesn't always stay in Europe. Most of Poland's recent defence contracts have gone to suppliers from South Korea and the United States. European manufacturers have received only a small share, and domestic Polish production, while expanding, remains limited. This isn't just a Polish issue. It's a structural weakness across the EU. According to the European Defence Industrial Strategy, more than 70% of EU defence procurement still flows to non-EU suppliers. That's precisely what Brussels is trying to fix, because without stronger European industry, higher spending won't bring greater autonomy.
Mr. Świerczyński, thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome. It's my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So the Americans have left this logistical hub in Poland, but Polish officials rushed to reassure the public that, this is just nothing significant, but you can sense an undertone of worry there. So how significant is this move?
Well, first of all, we need to remember that this particular move has been agreed upon with NATO allies, including Poland, many, many months ago. Actually before the last year's NATO summit in Washington. So it was not the Trump administration who actually pushed towards a reduction of this particular deployment. It was the Biden administration. Let's remember that the US military sent significant reinforcements to Europe, including to Poland, in early months of 2022. Of course, in reassuring the allies and deterring further aggression, and also with a mission to support this logistical movements, yes, those transports which were sent from the United States and other countries, and the coalition was truly global, as we remember, more than 50 countries, through the Jasionka-Rzeszów airport. That mission lasted more than 2 years. And of course, we all rely and we are grateful to our American allies for doing so. But finally, even they reach their limits in terms of how long can they go on, how costly it is for them, how does it change their training routines? Yes, and we need to remember that the troops which were carrying out this mission in Rzeszów were taken from what you can describe as a global as a global reaction force of the U.S. Armed Forces. That was the 18th Airborne Corps. So no wonder that the Americans have actually started negotiating with the European partners, with NATO allies.
No, I can understand. Pardon me for interrupting you, but
sure.
I can understand that. But the timing very often is critical,
yes.
And it comes at the time when the Americans are also talking about Europe doing their part. So, we had the Speaker of Polish Parliament saying it's a symbolic movement. And on top of that, the US general who was commenting on this, he said, this is going to save US taxpayer tens of millions of dollars. So the signal is, we are going to spend less on European defense.
The Americans have signaled this for a long time, haven't they?
Correct.
It was not even, Biden administration, but back to, George W. Bush and Barack Obama. The buzzword was burden sharing. And we tend to call it, responsibility sharing, yes, or stepping in by European countries, which is happening. But sometimes you need to push your partners to do so. I would agree that the timing is unfortunate. That we hear both the news from Jasionka, or actually from the European Command of the U.S. Army Europe and Africa, and this report by NBC and some other statements. Actually, there is a hearing, a series of hearings by the commanding general of the EUCOM, General Cavoli, currently happening
in Washington.
In Washington, yes, at the Capitol Hill. So all in all, it creates a bad impression. I would agree.
But it's consistent with earlier messages.
But it's not unexpected, really.
Right. So correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a military expert or defense expert for that matter, but it seemed to me that Poland for years was effectively betting on one horse when it comes to defense. U.S. presence here in Poland, purchases of U.S. equipment, but military spending wasn't really that high until very recently.
Until 2022 or 3, maybe.
So actually until the war and Russia's aggression on Ukraine. So the question is, President Trump said, no more free riding. He's saying nice things about Poland and he appreciates our effort, but in a sense that free riding applied to Poland as well.
For a long period of time, that's true. But again, let's remember that we were quite close to this 2% threshold for a very long time, because it was actually in 2001, I believe, that a bill was adopted to place Polish defense spending at 1.95% of GDP. Of course, the money was much smaller then, because we were still before joining the EU and before what you could describe as an economist journalist, a Polish economic boom, yes, which happened later. But it's true that Poland undertook very significant expansion of its military budget, including for procurement, only in 2022 or 23. Now exceeding 4% threshold. And being, a NATO leader in these statistics.
In terms of GDP,
yes,
relative.
Yeah.
So now that Poland leads the pack, it's not easy to switch from not having enough arms procurement to to coming up to a certain scale. But is Poland on the right track in your view?
Well, Poland has declared that it wants to create the strongest armed forces in Europe.
Is that a credible...
In terms of land force, of the army, right?
Number of soldiers.
Is it credible? Well, if you take into account that the plan is until... The plan to do so is until 2039, as we speak today, because there is a 15-year military planning period. Why not? Of course, many things will need to happen in significant proportion. That is, of course, we need to maintain this level of high level of military spending for a long period of time, maybe more than a decade. Yes, and of course there is this personnel chapter to it, to this story, which is more problematic, I would say.
So, what is the biggest challenge? Mobilizing enough men and women in uniform, or is it more important to become up to date with the quality of military gear?
Whatever gear you buy, you need to have personnel to operate it. Yes,
as the war showed.
The equipment doesn't fight; people do fight. So we need to put more attention to expanding the armed forces themselves in terms of numbers, in terms of personnel. We need to train reserves because, if, God forbid, anything bad happens, your professional army goes first, but then it needs reinforcements from reserve force. And that should be in millions, not in, tens or hundreds of thousands. It needs to be millions for a war like this one happening for 3 years in Ukraine.
So the training that the government recently announced for all...
I'm not quite sure because I guess we haven't yet seen a specific plan for it. Of course, we've heard the statements and we've heard the numbers. Yes, to train 100,000 people per year, which is probably doubling the current figure. I'm wondering, how is this going to happen? When even today, people who are queuing up, and because there is quite a successful recruitment campaign going on in Poland, but there is a problem that the capacity of training centers is too small, and how is the government going to solve this problem? I don't know yet.
So a lot of investment is required for that, in infrastructure, training infrastructure.
Not only infrastructure, but you need to have the trainers, yes, to train the trainees. So probably that was an idea discussed, in military and expert circles. They are going to reach out to the reservists, to the veterans, to those people who have left the armed forces already, but might be willing to maybe not rejoin, but to offer their competence in terms of being trainers.
Right. Polish military participated in a number of missions, yes. Very often US-led missions, either Afghanistan or Iraq. So is that experience still relevant, or has the battlefield changed so much that yes, there is a shortage of experience?
It's a very interesting question, and one that would probably require another session like this. But I would say that in terms of being part of command chain, of working together with Americans, Brits, French, Germans, and other allied nations, in terms of knowing the procedures of a big operation. Regardless, if it's around the corner or halfway, half a world across, it's still valid. In terms of how the battlefield has evolved since then, and let's remember, I mean, these were not operations against a peer opponent. These were not operations against Russia. So there's a lot of difference.
Question mark there.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to another topic. So what do you make of the structure of Polish arms purchases? Because as we saw in that feature, it's a little bit over the place, if I may say so as a layman.
But again, you need to remember that you cannot do everything at once.
Sure.
So you need to prioritize. It is pretty obvious that for the Polish political leaders and also the military commanders, priority is the land force. We need to have a robust land forces, that is the army, with tanks, with mechanized units, with a lot of artillery. This is probably the largest development which is happening. We are investing very, very heavily in both tube and primarily missile artillery, rocket artillery.
You mean Poland
systems.
is investing?
Yes, Poland is investing. Poland will have the largest artillery in NATO, full stop.
When?
Well, if those plans, which I've mentioned before, really happen, we may have it, by early 30s. Right.
And who is going to deliver that capacity? Polish companies, or will we have to continue buying abroad?
There is a mixed bag. A lot of this equipment comes from abroad, from South Korea and from the United States. Polish industry is, of course, very capable in terms of tube artillery system, that is guns and howitzers and automated mortars. We all know the name Krab, which is the Polish-made self-propelled howitzer. But we don't produce long-range missile artillery systems, and they are actually key to this revolution in military affairs, which this new procurement plan is going to bring to the armed forces. As the former Chief of General Staff, General Andrzejczak, put it once, we want to be able to put fire on them, being the Russians, within 300 kilometers range. And this is actually going to be delivered through these missile rocket artillery systems, primarily from United States, that is the well-known HIMARS system, as well as the Chunmu system from South Korea. In case of both of these systems, Poland is, and this is very important, that needs to be stressed, Poland wants to produce at home, here in Poland, missiles, munitions to those systems. Because only when you're able to produce munitions yourself, you can talk about, some kind of technological sovereignty.
Right. So is Poland on the right track there, or do you see any risks?
I think there are always risks, and nothing ever, comes to your according to your plan. I mean, there's.
But it's important to have a plan.
Especially, yeah, of course, and the planning process is important itself because you put your thinking into it. I would say that in terms of developing traditional platforms and systems, we are well on track to become the strongest army in Europe. What I worry a little bit about is the new generation warfare. That is drones, that is those small unmanned vehicles, small unmanned flying systems, underwater systems.
The Baltic Sea becoming such an important theater potential.
Absolutely. This is a new challenge, and what is even more important, I mean, it's not only the sea, not only the surface of the sea, but it's seabed. Yes, all those installations that we are so worried about are placed on the seabed. And this is a new concept of operation, still under development very much in NATO, but developing very quickly.
But is Poland moving fast enough with, let's say, submarine purchases? This has been talked about for years now, and no movement.
And still no decision on the front. I mean, there are movements. There's a lot of movement in this
but no decision.
But no decision. True. This is one of those areas where we need to hit ourselves handy and make and admit failure, basically, because we have practically lost the submerged capability today.
Right. Okay, let me move on to another topic, which is all these European programs. We saw, big numbers are flying around. Yeah. Ministers are meeting, proposals are being made. Again, I'm not an expert, so I'm counting on you to tell us what is really important among these proposals, which is most beneficial to Poland and the eastern flank.
I think the most important and most beneficial thing is easing those fiscal rules which prevented you from having deficit more than 3% of your GDP, because many countries were struggling with that, and including Poland. Poland is still, I guess, under this,
excessive deficit procedure.
Yes, you are better than the.
But that was effectively suspended now.
But this will actually ease. It will allow the government to make more bold decisions and move, more rapidly, perhaps, in terms of.
But it used to be the problem of money. I would agree with you. But today, really, it is not a problem of money.
And I agree with you that today the main problem of this, in this realm of security is production capacity of the industry, because money is there, political determination, political will is there. What is not delivering is the industry. It is not the industry's fault, by the way.
No, I understand that. But when you look at everything that is on the table, do you, as an expert who's been watching this for so many years, do you have this feeling like, well, finally there is a good chance that this is going to produce something? Or is it going to be another example of everybody talking big and then little action?
I will be able to answer your question more precisely after the June summit of the European Union, because still we have some decisions in this, process, in these very complicated mechanisms, which I don't really, totally understand. But I see very significant steps being made to create the Europe of defense that we have discussed for so many years.
Right. And what do you make of it seems that the EU and some NATO partners are not seeing eye to eye on some of these defense issues, and obviously there's a block of countries such as Hungary primarily, but also others who do not want this, who are basically opposed to more spending, they're blocking different initiatives.
But not in NATO. I mean, Hungary has not blocked anything in NATO.
Yes, so far, but a lot of money is supposed to come through EU mechanisms. And to circumvent that, there are these coalitions of the willing. And Poland, for about a year now, is pursuing closer ties with the Nordics, with the Baltic states. Is this a viable strategy of tying allies, let's say, in our corner of the world within NATO? Not as a separate thing, but...
You've mentioned in previous parts of our conversation the operations overseas, yes? These were made by coalitions of the willing. Even the United States, which had the support of NATO on September 12th, 2001, yes, after the 9/11 attacks, they didn't want to use the NATO mechanisms for.
But NATO offered to use it.
Yeah, of course.
All
yes.
the allies said.
But for some reason, coalitions of the willing are a more useful, maybe even more effective tool to do something within an alliance. Simply because, just as you said, you don't need to agree. You don't need the agreement of every single one, nation or prime minister or president. So I guess it is the right path to create, for strengthening the security, the regional security, especially in the so-called Baltic Sea rim. That includes Poland, the Baltic states, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, maybe also Norway, and of course Germany. To strengthen awareness of this place, on the map
As a theater.
Yes, as a very important military corridor and place to be defended.
So what would be? We have to draw to a close. So, in one sentence, what would be your advice to treat as an absolute priority for Poland and for this coalition of the willing here around the Baltic Sea?
To create credible reserve system to support the professional armed forces. That is probably the number one challenge, yes. Much more than equipment.
Marek Świerczyński, thank you very much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you very much for watching. This was On the Record. See you next week.